President Moon Jae-in departed for Washington on Wednesday for summit talks with U.S. President Trump. The talks will be the seventh of its kind and the third to be held in the U.S. Capitol. Today, we go in-depth on whether this Moon-Trump summit will salvage talks between North Korea and the U.S. that have halted since the no-deal Hanoi summit back in February. For that, we're joined by Dr. James Kim of the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. It's always good to have you with us.
Nice to be back down.
President Moon Jae-in is scheduled to meet with U.S. Secretary of State Pompeo, National Security Advisor Bolton, and Vice President Pence in respective order prior to his meeting with President Trump. Now, these three officials are known for their hardline North Korea policy. What could be a motive behind these arrangements of the meetings?
So Secretary Pompeo and National Security Advisor John Bolton, as well as Vice President Pence, are central figures when it comes to policy decisions related to North Korea. So if the president's goal here is to try to convince the United States to maybe shift his policy a bit on these issues, then it makes sense why he would be holding meetings with these individuals in addition to President Trump.
Now, before holding an extended summit, President Moon and Trump will hold talks along with First Ladies Kim Jong-suk and Melania Trump. Now, as far as I know, it's quite unconventional for the First Ladies to attend the summit meeting as well. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it could be, it's very unconventional, but it could actually soften the seriousness of the meeting. I think the overall approach to the talks has been relatively informal. As far as I know, the agenda hasn't been announced yet, and I'm not even sure it's ever going to be announced. It seems like this is a way to maybe soften the mood on the serious topic of concern for both leaders, and to have the First Ladies there to facilitate that, I think, is one way to make that happen.
And First Ladies Kim Jong-suk and Melania Trump will hold a separate luncheon on Thursday, Washington time. And this will mark the first time in 30 years for a South Korean First Lady to hold a one-on-one luncheon with a U.S. First Lady. Implications to this rare event?
So I think, better the rapport between the two First Ladies. I think the more personal and closer the relationship between President Trump and President Moon. So it's a good idea to develop that relationship. But I question whether there's going to be any lasting impact on policy side. Still, I don't think it hurts to have this kind of an event on the side.
Now to some more serious questions. Now the big question is how much the Moon-Trump summit will be able to narrow the gap between North Korea and the U.S. Well, the Blue House has stated that a continual early harvest is needed to move denuclearization forward. What kind of strategy do you expect from President Moon this time around?
I think we've already had a blitzkrieg of high-ranking officials about 2 weeks ago, all visiting and coordinating with their counterparts in Washington regarding this meeting. So a lot of the sort of the preparatory work has already been underway. And the announcements that have come out leading up to this meeting tomorrow is that South Korea is in agreement with the United States on a comprehensive agreement on denuclearization with a phased implementation. And this is where I think this idea of early harvest comes in. On the implementation side, I think President Moon is going to push very hard that there needs to be some substantive results here on the sanctions side for North Korea in order to continue the momentum towards complete denuclearization if North Korea is only willing to offer Yongbyon. So, and I'm not so sure that the U.S. is going to be in complete disagreement with this idea. Obviously, there's got to be some coordination and discussion on exactly what kinds of concessions we're talking about. But it'll be interesting whether, President Moon can convince President Trump to come around to seeing this the way that he sees it. And it's difficult because the U.S. has maintained a fairly consistent policy over the past year and a half or so on this issue, and they have not really changed their position. So it'll be interesting, what President Moon says to President Trump to get President Trump to come around to seeing this his way.
So President Moon will likely attempt to entice to induce some concessions from Mr. Trump on, especially particularly on sanctions?
Well, I mean, it's a try that he might, he might engage in. Or if he thinks that this isn't going to be successful, then it'll be just a nice photo op where he is then able to address this other issue about the gap in coordination between South Korea and the United States, which is, again, a big thorn on his side. And it's not just the North Korean issue that could potentially be a problem here. There are other outstanding alliance issues related to the burden sharing agreement, which, the negotiation has to restart again because that's a one-year agreement, right, along with a potential here for an auto tariff to be levied by President Trump based on Section 232 announcement and the report that the Commerce Department has already made.
You've briefly brushed upon some other issues that may be discussed on the table, but going back to the North Korea issue, how far do you think Trump will be willing to make concessions to make some progress this time?
There's, again, what I've said is, you take a look at what the president has said and done, and I look more at the action over the past year and a half, and the U.S. has not changed its position on this, that sanctions relief will only be possible after complete denuclearization. So it's not clear to me what it will take for President Trump to change that, that stance. But again, I think President Moon has stated his intention to try to do the best he can on this front, and he's keep banging away at this idea of an early harvest, which seems to suggest that he wants some kind of concession from the United States here.
So still tough road ahead. Now, another key issue garnering much attention is whether President Moon will be able to quell the controversy surrounding Seoul and Washington's discrepant approach to North Korea's denuclearization. Your thoughts?
Yeah, again, as I've said, this is an issue that is going to be a thorn in his side if this meeting does not go well. At the very least, what he can do is have a nice photo op with President Trump, and a good feeling kind of a meeting where people will, not question this gap between the U.S. and South Korea on coordinating its policies on North Korea. But President Trump has in the past gone off script on issues like the FTA during the first summit, for instance, when he mentioned that without President Moon being, prepared to answer any questions on that during a press conference. So if there's always that danger with President Trump, right, going off script, and if that does happen, if President Moon is unable to handle that kind of situation smoothly, it might not work to his advantage in quelling these kinds of issues and criticisms about the lack of coordination between the U.S. and South Korea.
So there's that Trump risk, if you will. Now, if South Korea and the U.S. succeed in finding the middle ground in resolving the nuclear stalemate, do you think this will likely lead to the third round of Pyongyang-Washington talks, as well as perhaps Kim Jong-un's visit to Seoul?
Maybe. I mean, there's always that possibility, but it's not clear to me at the moment why North Korea would come out of its shell and re-engage again. And that's largely because of some of the signals we're getting. The North Korean state media, 우리 민족끼리, for instance, recently responded to the South Korean Unification Ministry's statement to this effect, that, after the summit, that, there could be a potential here for another summit, after the U.S. ROK summit, another potential for a inter-Korean summit, and to move ahead on inter-Korean cooperation. And the 우리 민족끼리 came out, and I believe the direct quote was, the statement is nothing but an empty shell, quote unquote. Just empty talk without any feasibility. So the initial reaction coming out of North Korea isn't really positive and encouraging. So, but who knows? After the meeting with President Trump, we might have a breakthrough, and North Korea's thinking on this issue might change.
Now, Kim Jong-un presided the meeting of the ruling Workers' Party's Central Committee's Politburo on Tuesday, calling for a new strategic line to cope with the current tense situation. Also today, he convened an extended meeting, a full meeting of the Workers' Party Central Committee. Now, judging from these recent moves, can you read what is on Kim's card?
It's not clear. There are several other events that are lined up for this week, including the event next week on April 15th. And then the one-year anniversary of the summit towards the end of the month. So there are a lot of important markers that we need to be watching for and to be listening to Kim Jong-un's words very carefully. I would be looking for two things here. First, does he take his eyes off of the nuclear issue? Does he change his position on this denuclearization? And does he focus more on the economic aspects of this? There could be a potential there that he might be hunkering down for a long haul sort of, a march or arduous march living with this very oppressive sanctions regime. If his, argument is, we're going to try to fight this out and try to outlast our opponent who's trying to oppress us with sanctions. There could be a second announcement here, which is potential for a personnel shift. Could there be a change in the team that was leading this effort from the North Korean side? Would Kim Young-chul and Kim Hyok-chul no longer be the central figures negotiating with the United States? Will there even be a new team that's going to be announced that will handle this issue from this day on forward? So there's some potential here for some personnel shifts, as well as some policy orientation and posturing on the part of North Korea that we would be looking and watching for very carefully.
Now, very briefly before I let you go, during Tuesday's meeting, North Korea unusually refrained from lashing out harsh rhetoric towards the U.S. while also not mentioning a word about nuclear weapons. How do you interpret that?
Yeah, so this is what I was referring to initially, that if the focus is largely on the economy, and his argument here is that we're in this for the long haul, then clearly he wants to try to wait this out and trying to outlast the United States and live with the pressure. But if the focus is back on the sort of the nuclear issue and the strategic shift that he's talking about, and no longer on the Byungjin issue, there's also a potential here that North Korea is still open to the possibility of talks and negotiations with the U.S. as well. So there are two possibilities here, and it's not clear at the moment which one Kim Jong-un has chosen, but clearly he wants to leave the dialogue channel open for now.
All right, let's keep a close eye on how things unfold from this point. Thank you, Dr. Kim, for your insights today.
Thanks for having me.